Story 1. I could hear footsteps in my apartment, but I live on the top floor. This happened to me in 2019, the first year I lived alone. It was a small one-bedroom apartment on the top floor of a 4-story walk-up in northern New Jersey. Nothing fancy. The kind of building with thin walls, loud pipes, and peeling linoleum in the hallway. But the unit itself had a view of the street, a decent kitchen, and best of all, no one above me. I moved in mid-January. It snowed the day I arrived. I remember this because I slipped on the front steps carrying in a lamp and cut my knuckle. It healed by the time the noise started. At first, I didn't think much of it. Footsteps, faint ones. Maybe someone upstairs, I thought, until I remembered there was no upstairs. Just the roof, flat and tarred and only accessible by a locked maintenance hatch. I heard them again the next night, same time, around 11:30 p.m. Just a few steps, slow, deliberate. They came from above my bedroom ceiling. My bed was pressed against the far wall, and the ceiling there had a slight curve from the old plaster sagging over time. I lay there in the dark, listening. 4 steps, then silence. I told myself it was an animal, a raccoon maybe, but the pattern felt too clean, not scattered or erratic like an animal would be. It was quiet for a week after that. Then, one night, I was in the kitchen heating up soup. The apartment was silent, except for the faint hiss of the burner. And then I heard it again, directly above me. 2 steps, pause, 2 more. It sounded like someone walking across the ceiling, but matching my movements. I stood still. So did the sound. I took 1 step toward the fridge. The sound above followed. A single step. I froze, holding the spoon mid-air. A deep cold washed over my hands. I turned off the burner and backed into the hallway. Silence. No more steps. That was the first time I called the super. He lived 2 floors below and came up with a flashlight and a ring of old keys. We went up to the roof access, still locked. He showed me the untouched latch, said no one had been up there in months. Old buildings make noise, he said, especially in winter. He told me the heat pipes sometimes expand and creak in a way that sounds like footsteps. I nodded, even though I knew he was wrong. I knew the rhythm. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. And at exactly 11:29 p.m., the sound started again. This time, it wasn't just above, it was moving. From the back corner of the ceiling to the center, then slowly toward the other wall. A clean, slow pace, 5 steps, a pause. Then I realized something that made my stomach drop. It was mirroring my breath. Every time I inhaled, it moved. Every time I held my breath, it stopped. I tested it again. Deep breath, 1 soft step above, hold, nothing. It was reacting. The worst part wasn't that something was up there. It was that it was waiting, listening, matching. At 11:45, it stopped, just stopped. I didn't sleep at all that night, or the next. I kept my lights on, kept my TV running in the background to drown out the silence. By the end of that week, I started hearing the steps during the day. Not loud, just soft taps, like someone shifting their weight. Always above, always following. It started showing up about a week after the pacing. The first one was above my headboard, a jagged line maybe 6 inches long, thin, shallow, like someone had dragged a nail through the plaster. I didn't notice it until I turned on the lamp the next morning. It looked fresh. I touched it. Dry dust crumbled at my fingertip. That night I heard the footsteps again, only this time they were slower, measured, like someone taking their time. I kept telling myself I'd imagined it, that the scratch was already there, that I just hadn't seen it. But then it happened again. The next morning in the hallway by the coat closet, another mark, different angle. This one curved slightly, but the edges were the same, shallow, intentional, singular. I took a photo. I even put a piece of painter's tape next to it with the date written on it. Each morning after that, I checked every wall, and almost every morning I found a new mark, always in a different place, never overlapping, sometimes on the baseboards. Once on the ceiling above the shower, they weren't deep enough to be vandalism, no sign of force, no paint chipped away, just marks. One morning, I found 3. One in the kitchen, one on the inside of the bedroom door, and one on the underside of the bathroom sink. I started losing sleep. I called the police. The officer was polite but skeptical, said it was probably settling, that old buildings flex and crack and shift. He made a show of looking around but didn't take any notes. No prints, no sign of forced entry, no dust disturbed, nothing stolen. It's probably just age and your nerves, he said. I've seen it before. He left within 15 minutes. That night I stayed up and placed tiny squares of white flour in front of each window and door, just enough that if someone stepped in, it'd leave a trace. In the morning, every pile was untouched, but there was a new scratch. Right above the head of my bed, this one was longer, deeper. That was the first one that bled into the drywall. I could see the exposed fibers, thin, frayed, like old cotton. I started taping paper over the marks after I photographed them, just to see if they'd be covered again. But each new mark chose a different wall. It never returned to the same place. Each scratch felt closer, more deliberate. I wasn't the only one. In early March, I posted anonymously on a local sub-forum for my area. I asked if anyone else in the building had heard strange sounds, footsteps, movement above. I didn't mention the scratches. Not yet. Within 24 hours, I got 2 private messages, both from people in nearby buildings on the same block, both describing something similar, faint pacing noises at night, always from above. One girl lived 2 buildings down and said she'd been hearing it since Christmas, only when she was alone, only when she was awake after midnight. Another lived across the alley and said she'd once heard a voice, not words, just breathy murmurs, above her ceiling fan while she was falling asleep. The common thread: top-floor apartments. I did some research. My building, along with 5 others on the same side of the block, had been part of a fire code retrofit about 10 years ago. The top floors had originally been maintenance storage, then converted into apartments, but one unit, mine, had no record of previous occupancy. According to the permits, it was supposed to remain sealed during renovations due to structural issues, but somewhere along the line, it had been approved anyway. I asked the super. He shrugged, said he'd only started managing last year. I started keeping an audio recorder running at night. Just a simple one, voice activated. I left it on my nightstand. On the final night I spent in that apartment, I fell asleep early. I was exhausted. I remember waking up once around 3 a.m. in the dark. I didn't hear anything at the time. The next morning, I played back the recording. It was quiet for the first hour, then the softest click, like a door unlatching, then footsteps, slow, from one side of the ceiling to the other, then silence for nearly 10 minutes, and then, clear as if someone were standing beside the mic, a whisper, "Don't sleep on your back." My blood ran cold. I replayed it 5 times. The voice was hoarse, close. There was no background noise. I moved out that day. Left half my things behind. To this day, I haven't told anyone my full story, but I still can't sleep on my back, not even in silence. Story 2. He stood across the street every night, but never broke the law. This started in 2022 after I moved back home to take care of my dad. He'd had surgery on his hip and couldn't really get around. So I paused grad school and moved into the house I grew up in. It was a small, quiet neighborhood in Delaware, mostly retirees. Same kind of layout on every street, single-story brick homes, long driveways, trimmed bushes. The house across from us had been vacant for years. The owner passed away, and it sat unsold for a long time. The windows were always dark, no lights, no cars, no movement. Until one night someone was standing on the sidewalk in front of it. It was a man, just standing there. It was around 9:20 p.m. I had gone outside to throw something in the trash. When I turned to go back inside, I saw him, standing still across the street, not on the property itself, on the sidewalk, directly under the street lamp. He didn't move, didn't wave, didn't speak. I remember the way the light made a pale oval around his feet. His hands were at his sides. His posture was perfectly still, not even a foot shift. I went inside quickly and locked the door. When I peeked through the blinds again 5 minutes later, he was gone. The next night, he was there again. Same time, same place. Every part of me wanted to call the police, but what would I even say? That a man was standing on a sidewalk? He wasn't trespassing, he wasn't threatening, he was just visible. Too visible. I asked my dad if he'd noticed anyone outside lately. He said no, but he hadn't been going outside much. He spent most evenings in bed watching old crime shows with the sound turned low. By the end of that week, the man had appeared 5 nights in a row, always around the same time. Never moving, never closer. That was what made it worse. He didn't chase, he didn't shout, he just stood, like he was waiting for something, or watching for confirmation of something only he understood. It started to feel like a kind of psychological pressure. I'd walk to the kitchen and find myself glancing at the window, reflexively, not even consciously, just checking, and he was always there. After a while, I stopped turning on the porch light. I started keeping the blinds drawn all day. The stillness got inside my head. It wasn't just his presence, it was what he didn't do. Every night I'd feel guilty for noticing, for being bothered by someone who technically hadn't done anything. And yet every night I waited for him to cross the line. But he never did. He just waited, and somehow that made it worse. The police came once, for an unrelated call on the next block. When they passed, he wasn't there. I wanted to ask them to check him out, but I didn't. He hadn't broken the law. That became the phrase I kept repeating, over and over. He hasn't done anything wrong. So I did nothing too. And the space between us stayed silent, but not safe. It was a few days before Christmas when I brought it up at dinner. My sister was in town with her husband and their kid. We sat around the dining table eating pasta, making small talk, laughing. I told myself not to mention him, to leave it alone. But after my second glass of wine, it came out. I think someone's watching the house. They all looked up. I explained. The man, the sidewalk, how he kept coming back, how I wasn't even sure if he was real sometimes. My sister blinked slowly, then smiled in that way older siblings do when they don't want to cause a scene. Her husband asked if I had a picture. I didn't. My dad cleared his throat and said, "You've been stressed. That's all." It was the kind of moment where you feel yourself exiting the conversation before it's even over. That night I sat alone in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling, and I felt it, that pressure, that invisible presence just across the street, standing perfectly still. On Christmas Day, we all gathered in the backyard for a group photo. My dad in the center, my sister and her family on either side. I stood to the right, between the tree and the back window. I remember the sun was behind us. The picture was taken with a phone on timer mode. Everyone laughed when it clicked. I remember my niece said something funny, and I bent down to adjust her scarf just after the shutter sound. That night, my sister sent me the photo in our group chat. Everyone was there, except me. My spot was empty. Not like I'd walked away, not a gap. It was filled by a figure, not a person, not me, just a black shape, upright, opaque and wrong. No face, no details, just presence. At first I thought it was a glitch, a shadow, but the sunlight didn't match. The shadow had no source. I asked if they'd seen it. My sister didn't reply. Her husband sent back a thumbs up emoji. My dad said, "Maybe the exposure was off." I stared at that photo for an hour. Zoomed in, zoomed out, compared it to the real layout of the backyard. That figure shouldn't be there, and I should be. I remember standing there. I remember the timer flashing. I remember laughing, but the photo says otherwise. The next morning, I found the front door unlocked. I'm sure I locked it. I triple-checked every night, but the bolt was turned, and there were faint marks on the inside of the knob, smudges, not fingerprints, just the idea of contact. After that, I stopped showing anyone. I stopped asking, because the more I asked, the less I existed in the answers. By January, he stopped showing up. No more figure across the street, no more nightly presence, just an ordinary sidewalk again. But something felt worse. I couldn't say why. At first, I was relieved. I even went outside during the day without checking the window first. But then it started. Every night, not most, not sometimes, every night, I woke up at exactly 4:06 a.m. The first night, I didn't think anything of it. Just a dream that pulled me out of sleep. But the second night, it happened again. Same time. I checked the clock. 4:06. The third night, I noticed the porch light. It flickered, just once, bright, then back to normal. No power outage, no storm, just that one flicker. The next night, I left the blinds open, kept my phone recording on the windowsill. I fell asleep early. At 4:06, I woke up with my heart pounding, and I saw it again. The porch light blinked, on, off, on, only once. I checked the footage. There it was, a sharp dip in brightness. No sound, no movement outside, just light distortion. But when I slowed the footage down, frame by frame, there was a flash of something, a shape, on the edge of the porch, barely visible. A shoulder? A face turned away. I couldn't tell, but it was there for one frame, then gone. I sent the clip to myself, saved it 3 times in 3 folders, and backed it up to a drive. That morning, the porch bulb was unscrewed halfway, not burnt out, just loose. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want them to tell me it was nothing, because nothing doesn't wake you at the same time every night. Nothing doesn't leave you questioning if your reality has been subtly edited. Weeks passed. The waking didn't stop. 4:06 a.m. every single night. The light flickers just once. It doesn't matter where I sleep. Different room. Same time, different house, same flicker, always at 4:06. He never came back, but I don't think he needed to. He stayed just far enough to avoid being chased, and just close enough to follow me. Even now, if I close my eyes in the dark long enough, I feel it. The same presence across the street, not moving, not reaching, just there, still. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. Story 3. The voice on my baby monitor wasn't mine, but it was in my voice. This happened to me in the fall of 2021. My daughter was just under 4 months old. It was our first child, and my husband and I had moved into a new house just before she was born. A 2-story colonial in a quiet suburb in Pennsylvania. It was the kind of house that felt like it should come with a Christmas wreath and a dog. Everything looked right, but sleep was hard. The baby had colic, and between the feeding schedule and the crying, I was running on maybe 3 hours of rest most nights. My husband helped when he could, but he worked full-time. I was still on maternity leave, which meant most of the overnight wake-ups fell on me. I had a video baby monitor set up beside our bed, just one of those standard infrared ones with night vision, 2-way audio, and a lullaby feature. I kept the volume low at night, enough to hear her breathing, not enough to interrupt the rare moments of silence. It started on a Wednesday. Around 2:15 a.m., I woke up to the monitor softly playing music. Not the preloaded lullabies, a melody I didn't recognize, but it was in my voice. Soft, slow humming, a tune I never remembered singing. At first I assumed it was a glitch, or maybe I had accidentally recorded something earlier in the day. But when I looked at the screen, my daughter was fast asleep, not moving, and I wasn't in the room. I pressed the monitor's talk button and said something just to see if it was feeding back my voice. Nothing changed. The humming continued for about 20 seconds, then cut off mid-note. Silence. I stared at the screen for a long time. The room on the monitor didn't change. No shadows moved. The baby stayed perfectly still. I checked the device's audio history. It didn't save anything. The next day, I tested every function, played every lullaby, spoke into both ends. Recorded myself humming, nothing matched. I wrote it off as stress, sleep deprivation, until it happened again. 2 nights later, same time, 2:14 a.m. The humming started softly, same tune. Only this time the voice wasn't just humming. It began to sing, not words, just tones, exact replicas of my vocal rhythm. The same way I draw out a note when I'm rocking her to sleep. The same way I breathe between lines. It was me, but I wasn't singing. I froze in bed watching the screen. My daughter's chest rose and fell. Her hands were still. The singing continued for another 30 seconds, then faded out like someone backing away from the mic. The waveform on the monitor stayed perfectly steady. No spikes, like it wasn't detecting anything at all. I didn't tell my husband, not yet. I just started muting the monitor after 1 a.m. and I left the door to her room cracked, just in case. But the next week, the voice came back, and this time I recognized the song. It was a tune I used to sing to myself when I was little, a private melody, one I hadn't sung aloud in years, one no one else could have known. The monitor didn't glitch, it remembered. I started watching the playback. The monitor recorded motion-triggered clips to a micro SD card. It didn't save audio unless it detected crying, but I began reviewing every file anyway. One clip, dated October 3rd, showed something that made me sit down on the floor. It was just a 45-second video of my daughter asleep, but the mobile above her crib was spinning, slowly, clockwise. None of the windows were open. No vent was blowing, and she wasn't moving. Her arms were tucked in, face turned to the side. I watched as the bear hanging from the mobile turned, then the elephant. And then, just before the clip ended, the bear rotated again, back to the position it started in, as if something corrected it. I saved the clip and watched the live feed. Nothing. The mobile hung still. I checked the next clip. This one showed a different angle. It was a wider shot, showing more of the wall to the left of the crib. And in that frame, the stuffed animal we kept on the shelf, a beige rabbit with one ear bent, wasn't in the same place. In real time, it was resting against the wall, but in the video, it had been turned, facing the crib. There were no hands, no strings, no signs of movement, just objects. Wrong. And my daughter never stirred. That's what kept sticking in my head. She was too still. On nights when these recordings happened, she didn't cry once. Her legs didn't kick. Her arms didn't twitch. Just silence. I told myself it was a bug. Maybe heat was causing expansion. Maybe the house was shifting. But the movements were always too slow, too deliberate. One night I stood outside her room watching the monitor. At 2:17 a.m., the camera triggered. I peeked in, quietly, slowly. The crib was unchanged. But I noticed something new. The baby blanket had shifted, pulled tighter around her than when I'd left it, tucked in like someone had smoothed it over. But I hadn't, and she couldn't. I took her into our room that night and kept her beside me. She slept soundly, the monitor stayed silent, but the next morning when I checked the camera, the stuffed rabbit was back in the crib, facing her. Eventually I told someone. My sister came over one afternoon to help me with laundry. She has 2 kids of her own. I brought up the monitor, the singing, the voice that matched mine. She didn't laugh, but she did tilt her head. "You're not sleeping," she said. "This happens. There's a name for it. Something like maternal echo hallucination. Your brain projects familiar sounds when you're overly tired." I asked if she'd ever heard her own voice playing back when she hadn't spoken. She didn't answer that one. I went online, looked into audio hallucination imprint. It's a thing. Apparently, some new parents, mostly mothers, report hearing phantom voices from baby monitors, especially under sleep deprivation. Usually it fades with rest, but mine didn't. The voice started speaking. Not humming, not singing, whispering. Short sentences, low, cracked, in my voice, but older. It started saying things like, "You left me here," or "Still waiting." Always after 2 a.m., always soft enough that I questioned whether I'd imagined it. But once, my husband heard it too. He sat up in bed and said, "Did you just talk to her?" I shook my head. He stared at the monitor. "That sounded like you." We both looked at the feed. The crib was empty, because our daughter was sleeping in our room that night. I pulled all the files from the camera, went back through every saved clip. Then I found something. A file dated a full week before she was born. Back when we were just testing the equipment, the room had still been half painted. No crib, no baby, just an empty room. But in the clip, a soft voice, my voice, can be heard, whispering, "Don't forget me this time." I sat there with my hand over my mouth. I checked the timestamp. 2:13 a.m. No one had been in the house that night. We were staying at my in-laws. The monitor had recorded from an empty room, and the voice had already been there. I unplugged the device. We stopped using the monitor altogether, moved her crib into our room. But even now, on quiet nights, I still hear the voice. Not through speakers, not on playback, just nearby, soft, in my breath. And sometimes, when I walk past a mirror in the dark, I see something, not my reflection, but the shape of my mouth, forming words I haven't said, like it's still speaking, still using my voice, still waiting in the room I made for someone else.